control devices dictates four-way and two-way stop signs. I'm afraid that this intersection probably won't meet the warrants for a four-way stop sign, and if you went to do a two-way on it, it would be on Deering, not on Middlesex. Okay?
Right.
So, you know, there's a lot to consider, and I think that intersection at Middlesex and Deering is gonna suffer with this traffic flow. As for the comments on the angle parking, that is a suggestion that was made. It was something that we looked at as a way to increase the opportunity for parking in the area without having a huge impact on the landscaping and the lot, and the putting up very large retaining walls, things like that. As for it being dangerous, it seems to work on Haven and High Street, and they're a little bit more busy than Middlesex Avenue. So I think that we could make that work if that was to be an option. I wouldn't completely rule it out, at least not in my judgment. The traffic engineers and Boris may have a different idea on that, I'm not sure. But those are just, you know, we're trying to come up with ideas to try to help with the situation. I hope the project's successful. I'm sure it will be. I hope we can do something to address the parking and the traffic flow. Thank you.
Can I just quickly on that, you mentioned there's 10 spaces on Middlesex now. If we went to the angle parking, how many more spaces would that create?
Depending on where the hydrant is, and assuming nothing else changes, it would effectively be twice as much on the, if they're 10 now, it would be approximately 20.
So you could go from 10 to 20?
Yeah, it would go from 10 to 20, but it may be 17 or 18. We'd have to lay it out because there are issues at, you know, where do you begin it relative to the corners.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would be it's typically 2 to 1, you know, a parking space is 20 feet versus 2 that are 10 feet wide.
Yeah.
But you have to consider the intersections and the corners,
Sure.
so I don't
Sure.
think it would be a full 2.
Right.
We might pick up 8 spaces.
George?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't want to take up a lot of the residents' time. I'll let them speak, but I'll be very brief. I echo almost everything the chief says. I think the driveway entrance is creating a safety hazard. I think a full traffic and parking analysis is dictated by this project. It should be done. And with respect to the angle parking on Middlesex, I agree it could go in, and they might want to consider something that was proposed down by the on Haven Street, reverse angle parking.
Yeah.
You force people to back in, so you drive out. Now, we know there's always going to be someone that will come off the opposite side of the road and drive in, but 75 to 90% of the people will have to back in. It's a lot safer for them to back in as they're pulling up, but then they just drive out, and it's safer for everyone in that location.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm the chair of the
Sure,
Library
please.
Delegate Committee. I just wanted to address a couple of points.
Please.
2 points. There's a lot of different ways to go on this. On the second exit, let's just be clear that the addition needs to stay, right? That's the basis of our state grant. So the site is pretty much, so there's really only 2 choices, I think. One is to come around along the School Street side and basically get the rainbow that we currently have, or to cut a hole in Deering, and have all the entrance and access on Deering Street. I think those are the only 2 choices that this site offers. And I just want to make sure we're clear on we can talk about it more, we can do some traffic analysis, but the site impact going along School Street would be quite significant. Setting aside cost, I just want to emphasize what Chris said. There'll be a 10-foot retaining wall all along School Street. It'll basically be like an interstate around there to get down in. If that's on balance what the town recommends, and that, you know, if that's what the town wants to do, we can do that. We'll have to hear from the School Street folks if that's their choice. The other choice of cutting second entrance in Deering is, you know, it's going to be some grading challenges to even be able to do that. It'll change the flow. In our view, it'll reduce the safety of the drop-off because you're coming the other way. And Gene, if I could ask you to go to the end of this presentation, there were 2 slides. I think we also want to test the assumptions about adding the meeting room, expanding the meeting room. I don't think we should assume immediately creates extrapolated parking challenges. I mean, it's possible, but I thought that we have some data from the current meeting room use, and I thought it was important just to base the conversation a little bit in the current facts, because it should be at the end there. There we go. So if you look at this is the last couple of years' usage data of the big meeting room. This is currently has 110 capacity. So the room we're adding, the current room we have will expand from 110 to 150 maximum. The purpose of having a larger room isn't necessarily to have a performance center feel. That's not the goal here. The goal is to allow a denser use of this bigger space. As you'll see, Gene, if you can tap down a little bit because we have the frequency. Most of the meetings, most of the use of the big space currently, the prior slide, is in the smaller, the average of 35 users. The point is, it's not auditorium style generally, it's tables and breakout scout meetings and things like that. That's the use of the big space. The expansion of the space is not to have a 150-person performance center. It's to enable more meetings like this. If you look at the use in the last year, the annual use, we have 20 Friday morning sing-alongs that use the big room, and it's at capacity, that's for sure. On the second floor, with one exit, I think the first floor addresses a lot of safety concerns. So in a year, we only do 5 other events, concert or a lecture today. Now, if we have a nice room, maybe we'll do some more, but not many more. It's the library's current policy. To the extent we have an author that is expected to attract a crowd or a significant thing, we immediately book performance at one of the schools for that. The intent really isn't to have 140, 150 person evening events. So we do 5 a year outside the Friday mornings. Maybe that'll go up, but I think we need to keep in mind that even if we have 40 in one room and 40 in the other, plus patrons, the incremental change in parking is not going, we're not gonna have 150 cars. I remember the sing-along, at least half the attendees are not drivers. There's probably even more kids than, so I just want us to make sure we understand, and I don't know if the neighborhood is burdened by the parking now. My understanding is there aren't that many complaints, but that's up to the fact. But I don't think we're gonna have suddenly 100 extra cars being distributed out into all the contiguous neighborhoods. It's only now and then. So I just wanna have those facts out there. It's hard to tell for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. More public comment. Yes.
Yeah, I live in I'm Mary Susie, I live in the cutout in the bottom. Is there some way you can't go around the port, what do you call that, port cochere thing? You can't go out, I mean, the hill's much less on that side. Why couldn't you, like, be going out, like, over here, where it's going out now, and coming out that way, is that?
Sure, right.
And, I mean, I love trees too, but if that tree weren't there, would going out here be more of an option?
Well, we know that going out here straight, if you will, creates a conflict with the intersection immediately adjacent to it.
Well, why could it go around and go out where it goes out now?
I think in order to make, for a truck, for example, to make this sort of 90-degree turn, we'd have to swing out into the landscape and basically cut the hill, and we'd probably have 2 retaining walls to do it.
Well, it's just much less of a hill on that side than it is on School Street.
At this point, it is a little lower along here, but it's it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't improve the parking necessarily per se. We add a few spaces.
Could the entrance and exit be onto Middlesex without that tree there?
Which tree we're talking about? This tree right
Yeah,
here?
that tree.
Straight
Well, if we went straight out,
Yeah.
I think the problem is that we end up with a conflict with an intersection that's immediately next to it. So, for example, if you had somebody coming down Middlesex, making a turn into that, then it would be sort of crossing intersection traffic just coming out of that intersection. So you might have people trying to turn into Deering Street and somebody trying to turn into the site at the same time. So it strikes us as a conflict to have the 2 roadways so close.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know I already spoke, but I have to speak up. The situation that you just described is exactly what happens on Deering Street now. And to kind of reinforce, I suppose the point I was trying to make earlier is that Deering Street is a residential, essentially a side street. So the traffic pattern proposal to dramatically increase and carry a lot more traffic really changes the character of that street. Middlesex, I know earlier in your presentation you described as not getting a lot of use. It gets a lot of use, and it gets a lot of fast use because it's a cut through and a cut around. So I guess, again, you know, a traffic study exploring different options. The problem that you just described about Middlesex is exactly what the problem is of going into Deering Street right there, on what is essentially a moderately quieter street.
I guess we see as the controlling the traffic flow into a single intersection because I think it's a different condition to have two intersections side by side. That in general, from a traffic standpoint, is not something we would typically do where we have a curb cut so close to that intersection. I think in most towns to put two curb cuts, major curb cuts like that, right next to each other, with one being a major intersection, we typically would not do that. Too much crossing traffic.
Yes.
I think she's
I
saying
may
go straight
misunderstand.
out with both.
Straight up
You're
with
talking
both.
about both ways,
Going straight out with both.
That's what I'm talking about too, Nancy. I'm
Oh,
talking
okay, I'm
about,
sorry.
I have an intersection right here and I'm creating another one right next to it here.
Okay.
Well, unless it's, straight out to exit and right turn
Right
only,
turn only.
and that might be a possibility to allow those to exist, but I think we'd rather have a traffic consultant help us determine whether that was a safer approach than ingress and egress out of the same spot. I know that's the fire department and police department requested to see if we would come out from both sides directly straight into Middlesex, again with that idea that there would be two intersections. That didn't seem to be the right approach, but perhaps a hybrid of those two might be the right way to go.
Yes.
My name is Nanette Hanlon. I live on the corner of Middlesex and Deering. So I do see that intersection there. I see the almost collisions and the pedestrians almost getting hit, and it's a very dangerous spot anyway. And now with adding the two-way, I can see how that would even just add to it. I mean, I'm all for public safety. It's gotta be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Guess I'll hand over here, yes.
Evan Warner, owner, project manager, and another resident of Reading. I just wanted to comment on a few things that I've heard here. Aside from coming straight out, exiting onto Middlesex Ave and making a right turn only, that very same thing could occur in the current plan that's here to address this woman's concern about the remaining part of Deering Street kind of becoming doubled in traffic flow. So coming out and doing a right turn only basically gets everyone where they were going in the previous secondary exit. So in other words, they'll go straight across Middlesex and down Deering Street for that added flow. I think the other thing that I want to point out are that some of the considerations relative to parking, we understand that there's that we'd love to be able to get more parking here. I think some of the sacrifices to achieve that are very great. It's not only the park-like atmosphere and the feel here, but it needs an impact on the neighbors and the direct abutters. Any of those other driveway configurations or parking configuration are coming at a very high cost to the project, to the taxpayers, for what we think is not a lot of benefit in terms of any kind of added parking there, and the impacts with retaining walls and whatnot on the neighborhood seems to outweigh the idea of just generally trying to disperse that fairly evenly throughout the neighborhood. So I just wanted to kind of comment on that, and if there's some concern about that Deering Street. There's any number of different traffic-related, come out left turn only, to get traffic going elsewhere throughout the neighborhood. If there are specific concerns about added increase in traffic flow or traffic pattern, it seems like that can certainly be handled with those type of traffic control signs. We also heard at some of the community meetings that you know, that there is concern in the neighborhood about the speed along Middlesex Ave particularly. So I think in addition to, we understand that maybe not a four-way stop at Middlesex and Deering, but consideration of a two-way stop along that, at that intersection, and possibly consider some speed control measures along Middlesex, and basically trying to lower the speed limit there to try to get to slow folks down. I think it would deal with a problem that already exists at the library.
Yes, sir.
Mike Marquette, I live on the corner of Middlesex and School Street, and I guess just to sort of agree with some of this gentleman's comments, that I think bottom line is, it seems like there's gonna be very limited opportunity to increase parking for the most part. And whether or not you start cutting more into the hillsides to pick up a few parallel, angled parking or whatever, just doesn't seem to really be worth it. You talk about the cost associated with picking up a few more parking spaces. If it's to the detriment of dramatically changing the landscape, it just doesn't really seem that it's worth it. As a neighbor to it, I'd rather have to deal with a few nights here or there where there's parallel parking around the neighborhood, as opposed to every day looking out my driveway at a 10-foot retaining wall. I'll feel like I'm living next to Home Depot or something. So I think, the most that can be done to sort of keep the integrity of some green space and the hillside and all that, I think is well worth, not picking up another few parking spaces.
Karen, in the many years we've lived there, there've been events, and it hasn't been an issue.
It is an issue though. On our side it is, on Deering. I mean,
As far as parking?
Yeah,
Well,
it is.
access or parking?
No, parking.
Parking.
It is.
Go ahead.
I'm Kathleen O'Leary, I live at 81 Middlesex Ave. We're adjacent between Deering and Grant, opposite side. And we don't have presently curbing there, so we're used to, maybe not used to it, but we have traffic and parking in the front for all the events. But curbing is, I feel, a safety issue for foot traffic. We have kids, we have a lot of foot traffic, adults also, and some of the elderly. If the town could consider curbing between Grand and Deering, just give a visual line for drivers that do speed down there, and also maybe prevent them driving up on the sidewalk.
See a hand over here? Nope. Yes.
John Grecian, I live at 22 Dudley Street, so 22 Dudley, so corner of here in Dudley. And I guess to counter a little bit of the comments about there won't be that much more parking needed. Earlier comments were made about make this more of a community center, there's more room there, and because there aren't many places we can have an event during the day, at the schools, you can't really get it at the schools, this would be the day event activity area. So, as you had said earlier, Mr. Adams, the library will be used for normal library use, and then you'll have the meeting. And similarly, we have on Dudley Street parking during certain events, and that's fine, it's not that often. It doesn't affect it that much. I could see this really being much more of a community center, much more of a parking issue, much more of a traffic issue, and I think it really be small.
Yes, John.
Hey, Charlie. John Arena, Francis Drive, Planning Board of Selectmen. Most of the conversation tonight, has been over the plan, the traffic plan as envisioned. And it's a version of what exists today, and I get it. What I see here, though, is the removal of a second means of egress and ingress into the building and into the parking lot. Think not about how it will work. Think how it works when there's a failure, single point of failure. That inlet, if there's a car accident or other means of interruption, you can neither access the building, you can either exit the parking lot. And what was a means of ingress into the property, that roadway up in front, has been diminished to a walkway. I'm just curious, what was the thinking in removing that? I'm thinking now just purely safety when something completely unforeseen occurs. How do you get into the building with
equipment, stretchers, emergency personnel? It's an
Yeah.
open question. Why was that removed?
Can you address that?
There is, this is the porte cochere. First of all, it's not high enough for a large truck to go through across the front. And there are methods to get into the building which actually do not exist right now. We're introducing two, there are emergency egresses, which in an emergency can also be ingress. And this fire stair and this fire stair, neither of those exist right now. There is a door right here into the middle, but that would be replaced with two. So we're not really taking away the emergency egress from that side. We're actually enhancing it. It's possible to go in the same way. It's also possible to enter the building from the lower entrance here, which brings you into the heart of the building and right to the elevator, if you will. So we also have a access point right here off of an accessible walkway.
I don't mean to interrupt. I'm not talking about the building. How do you get to the opening in the building? How do you drive the truck to the building?
That you cannot do in this plan. You do not drive across here.
So how do you take advantage of those wonderful openings you just described?
Well, again, in our experience, to have a building that has 3 open roadway sides with some setback, it's not always a luxury to have 3 open sides or to have 2 ways in and out.
My only point is today you have the means of egress and ingress through the front. You have what appears to be a roadway. I understand you can't get through the portico. You can get around it. This removes that in its entirety and replaces it with a walkway. Under the normal case, none of that's needed. I'm thinking of an emergency situation where the parking lot is blocked and you either have to get to the lot or the building. You lose them both at this point.
But the,
I think, by right, that is true. However, we make an offer to increase this pathway in terms of width, perhaps not to the 20-foot, but something that is reasonably large that our truck can access to get to what is a door that doesn't exist now on the side, and be able to at least in that one event, or that event that of course no one can foresee that might happen, to be able to access a different point in the project. And remember that interior of that, we're not using the existing elevator, we're also increasing the elevator site for a stretcher. So we're trying to make the building safe, and we're actually forced to by code. But I think to your point is, physically, it's almost impossible to continue with that addition that sort of makes the library viable in the first place, to move the road all the way through so that it has a 10-foot retaining wall or engineered in such a way that can't be accomplished. But to capitulate and say that if we can get this, we can get a pedestrian to walk there on a flat, reasonable surface, if we can make that a little wider so that a truck, in the case of emergency, needing a second ingress to the site, can come onto that location and get to that door and have a second means of ingress in that particular case. That would be what I think would be possible. Again, we try to mitigate the issue of a 20-foot pathway / emergency road and try to get to some agreement. Maybe it's 16, maybe it's something. We understand the engineering of the grass doesn't work all the way up very well, plus you still have to plow it, and that means that, that happens or doesn't happen. So to make it wide enough for an emergency vehicle to access might be the best alternative.
Is there a reason why that wasn't in this plan for tonight's presentation? It was thought of earlier.
I think we're here to try to
I think one of the
deal with conflict.
consequences,
That's
if you notice,
exactly
it is
what we're-
wheelchair accessible all the way up there. I don't think in an emergency you have to go, sorry, Andrew Grimes, one of the Oak Street, also on the library board of trustees. With the access, it's wheelchair accessible. In not every situation do you get to drive right up to the door. So I think that was part of the thinking, was that you could wheelchair roll a stretcher a few feet to get to the door. You don't have to drive the truck right up to the door every time.
I'm thinking more if you had a car fire or you had somebody collapse in the building, not a case where somebody's in a wheelchair as a normal means of conveyance.
No, but
Somebody's ill.
Right.
yeah, but I mean, wheelchair means gurney.
Yeah.
I unfortunately have had the opportunity to ride in them a couple of times.
You weren't driving though.
No, I was not.
Any other comments?
I'm John Halsey. I live at 75 Beaver Road, and I'm on Board of Selectmen. So a couple of things that I think are, to Mr. Weston's point, I think there's some integration of items going on here. One of them, I think, right off the bat, the taxpayers know exactly what they're spending. They chose what to spend, and they voted. So if this gets built in the best interest of the public, it'll be done with the dollar amount of money that they've prearranged for that to happen, which is great. Another item that kind of connects to this, on this parking issue, is that, you know, we talk about the addition to this library, which I think is going to be fabulous. And I actually think that there is pent-up demand for that kind of space in this town. I know it is, because we're leaving town to have these kinds of meetings now. And one of the things that was, at all the public meetings I went to, it was broadcast loudly that this was gonna be a great new opportunity. And I do see it as that. So to then somehow minimize the impact that it's going to have, I think is probably not understanding what the public is wanting. The public voted for this by large majorities. And I think it's great. I think they did that because they agreed with the vision of what was gonna happen here. So now it's time to embrace the vision and say, okay, what's that gonna mean from a practical standpoint when we look at the site? And so, you know, public safety has got to be large. It's a very important item. We've heard from our chief of police, and we've heard from our town engineer, and they have questions about the way that this site is being engineered. And to somehow dismiss picking up 8 to 10 parking places, I think is something, you can't just dismiss that. Particularly when you've got the paid professionals telling us, that's probably a pretty good idea. It's probably gonna improve traffic in the neighborhoods. And I listened to, you know, a mother talk about the traffic, you know, coming through her neighborhood where her children are playing. Already, it's going too fast. Already, it's probably more than she wishes it was. And now, we're gonna guarantee with this kind of a setup, it's gonna be twice as much, likely. It's certainly gonna be more. So, if we can begin to, you know, compromise, look, I love trees and I love parks, and I really do. And if anybody knew me, they would know that I've spent half my life in the woods, okay? The other half on a baseball field. So green space is really important to me. But, you know, sometimes in the interest of public safety and in the interest of people who live in these neighborhoods, we may need to sacrifice a tree. And we may need to change the look a little bit. And we may need to have some angle parking, which we use and have used in residential neighborhoods quite successfully and quite safely around this time. So I think that it's important that when we have a public meeting, and I think it's important when well-meaning volunteers employ project engineers and consultants and architects. I think what's important is you don't just look at the end in mind, you understand what you'd like to accomplish, and then you march together in a journey of compromise to get there in a way where everybody's safe and as many people's interests can be served as possible, because this is a public project, you know, that's being funded with taxpayer dollars and being embraced in a neighborhood who maybe bought a house there because they love that historic building, and it's great. And so let's not tear it down, let's fix it. And oh, by the way, let's go ahead and expand it because there's pent-up demand for not 150 spaces, because there's in that plan, there's room for 150 in the main hall. There's room for 30 in the conference room across the hall. If you look on the upper floors, there's more room there, continue to be used as it's being used now. So, you know, this is gonna turn into a hub. I mean, it clearly is, because the vision of the volunteers and the library made it so, and voters embraced it. So I think you gotta be very, very careful about just saying, okay, this is the way it's gonna be, you gotta eat it this way. You know, maybe we need to re-season it, and maybe we need to cut it up into different pieces and look at it another way.
Bert Almeida, 37 School Street, right across the street from the library. First of all, as far as parallel parking, lived there for 15 years. Don't mind it at all. Actually love it. I love living across the street from the library. When people park in front of the house, I could care less. I don't want a 10-foot retaining wall in front of my house. I don't want a 4-foot fence on top of a 10-foot retaining wall, because I think that's the general gist of the plan, because you have to have a fence.
Yeah, there's a portion where there would be a 7-foot retaining wall with a fence on top.
Okay, we don't want to, none of us want to look out to a 10-foot retaining wall or fence retaining wall combination. That would be disgusting. Like Mike said, we don't live at Home Depot. Don't mind the parallel parking in front of the house. Like I said, I've lived there for 15 years. I welcome it. And as far as safety, right now, under the current condition, we go with the egress, the access and egress from the School Street side of the addition. It seems to me that if you have a 7-foot tall retaining wall with a fence on top of that, and an ambulance parks on School Street, they're not egressing. They can't access that building from School Street. Right now, they could. I mean, all you have to do is park on School Street, what is it, a 30-foot walk up the hill? Even with a gurney, you can go up that hill. Maybe not in the wintertime, but it would be pretty easy to get up that hill. You put a retaining wall there, forget it. It's not gonna happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to just make one remark regarding the angle parking.
Yeah.
One thing we've been cognizant about throughout looking at this is that, again, we don't favor the 90-degree or the angle parking. We don't feel we think it's not relatively safe compared to other alternatives. But even in the backing in scenario, which I'm familiar with, if they have it in my town, for example, but we've been very cognizant about the issue of headlights. So if you imagine people backing into those spaces at night, it means that all of those headlights are all going to be shining into this neighborhood. While people slowly, and it is slow to back up, especially at night, into those spaces, all of those headlights are going to be shining into the neighbors' houses. So we've tried to mitigate that, for example, in this scenario with some landscaping here, because it is an issue of what the scenario is at night versus what it is during the day. So I just wanted to point that out.
Any other public comments? So I was wondering if we could turn to one other thing, getting off the parking and traffic for just a moment. One of the things we really haven't shown, and just spend a couple of minutes if we could, is on the elevation stuff a little bit.
Yes.
Just so people can see that a little bit. So
Jesse, we have to find an original submittal because I did not include those.
We have them.
The renderings.
Site plan, CPDC.
It's too big, yeah.
Probably the 3D at the end of it, you'll have to get that street. I think it's in there. Right there. And I think there's anything behind it. This is a view from the parking side. This is a view from the parking lot side of the building. This is the original existing building. This is the new addition. This is the glass enclosed entry, which is also new, that wraps around to the front of the building. The present entry is here.
Yeah.
And that little head house would come away, the ramp would go away, these windows get re-exposed and restored. This becomes the new entry, the book drop offers immediately next to it, and this is the new addition. So you would enter here and go straight into the building and rise up into the main level of the building. So this is, this facade work would all be repaired, the windows get replaced, the roofing gets replaced. The intent is to try to replace the turret structures that were lost in the fire. And this addition is meant to be a quiet, simple addition, not meant to compete with the heavily articulated original building, but to be sympathetic to it. Gina, I think if you go one more.
I'm sorry, can you stick on this one? Where the book drop off will be
right there.
right there. in front of the entrance.
next to the entrance. But on the
Cars will
entrance side.
queue.
No, it's not a drive, it's not
It's
a,
not a drop off, right?
Will
You
there
have
be-
to go park, get out of your car and go put your.
Yeah,
It'll be
you
a
can,
drive.
that's what the short-term spaces right here would allow you to get up. Or if you had a passenger with you, you could just pull up person, go out, drop the book, get back in
Yeah,
the car. and keep
the
going.
emphasis is on passengers. It's a much more relevant safety issue, letting the kids and passengers off to the right into the building versus the book drop is.
I'm sorry, so can you explain it again?
The emphasis, so the current design, the cars come around so the passenger side is facing the building.
Yeah.
So when the kids pop out of the car, they go right into the building, as opposed to now, generally, they'll come out the other side.
Right.
Into traffic, so so the focus is on the passengers versus book drop, is given a choice, right?
Okay. Great, thank you.
But there would be, I didn't really see it, but there would be like a short-term parking,
Yeah, it's
15
located
minute,
right
so
here.
that someplace where
Yeah.
you can stop
Yeah.
and run over.
There's a parallel space right there.
Who's enforcing that?
everybody else in the parking lot.
Police are very engaged.
Sorry, I just
Is
wanted
there,
to.
is there a side view of that from like from
There's-
School
I
Street?
think the north, if you look at the.
I think that's the only one we
There's
got.
only one rendering.
Yeah.
Then if we back up into the, this is the north side, this is the addition. This is the west side, but this is the north side. And if you back up one more, Gene, I think you'll see the east. Here, this is the east. This is a little deceiving because these dark areas are really not dark like that. That's just the CAD line work sort of in the image sort of turning to black. That's not the intent. This is a sunscreen with separation. And this is the screen for the equipment above it. It's not gonna be a black zone like that. It's just the line work sort of flowing all together.
We have perspective from that view that we can leave at the library, it might already be there if you want to drop it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we go to just the north elevation, there's one question that when you first presenting, you talked about being a school and the entrance was there. Just curious if you had thought about coming back to this front entrance through your design, thinking about making that a focal point to return it to what it was.
We did look at that. We looked at where the primary energy is now from the parking, because that's where, the majority of, not the majority, but a healthy population comes and parks, so that it had to be a primary entrance. It had to be a location from which we could organize the library and the supervision. At the same time, we looked at what it meant to take care of this as an accessible entry. If we make this also a main entrance, we have to, by regulation of the access board, also make it accessible. It did not work particularly well on the inside. We had to add another stairway, we'd have to introduce yet another elevator. It was eating up a lot of budget and a lot of program space for not a lot of benefit. So on balance, working with the library committee, it was deemed that we could get better value out of capturing that space in a different fashion by, we have an alternate to build a room inside of that porte cochere to add program space if it can be afforded.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's if you've been in the library and looked in that space, it's very attractive and very awkward. I mean, it's smaller than anything that you basically can't convert it. But it does look beautiful.
What's the elevation of the, can you go back to the other side? The east elevation, those doors below the main meeting space?
Here.
What's the elevation of that door, that threshold relative to School Street?
Yeah, we have to go to the grading plan.
It's like 10 feet more or less.
It's 10 more
Yeah, it's
feet
about
down to
10
School
feet.
Street from
10
there?
feet.
Yeah, I mean, there's this fairly substantial
Okay.
slope.
And that's why the accessible route has to almost go parallel to that, because there's no way that you can get from School Street up to that entrance and have an accessible means. That's why it comes from Middlesex,
Mhm.
almost as if you're traversing they parallel to the, before the grade starts to drop off. Any other comments? Okay. You wanna close the meeting?
Move that the CPDC close.
Or do we want to?
Okay, what's the question?
Well, I guess typically, right, I mean, this is a little bit different, but typically when we would have a project like this where there are still some open issues.
I was gonna get to that, right.
Yeah, some
You wanna
open
do it before
issues.
the-
We wouldn't necessarily close the public hearing, we would keep it open so that if the applicant came back with more information, we could have the public hearing, we could discuss those in this community forum with the public and not go through all the hoops of opening a new public hearing. So, just thinking if that's the game plan, then we probably don't wanna close it, we just,
Okay,
but I don't know if that's.
yeah,
Well, do we expect to write a decision on this? Or
well, we
just
don't.
make
So
recommendations?
maybe we should just, so we can turn to that
Leave
what
it
we were
open.
talking
Yeah.
about. So just following up on what's that?
We have a draft decision.
We have a draft decision,
How
yeah.
does this work, though, if we
We
don't?
deciding.
We had a decision for the high school.
Yeah.
We had a decision for other town projects like the ice rink. There was a town project.
But it's not binding, right?
It's just a decision, it's like any other site plan review decision based on a review.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I've heard, I mean, reviewing the plans and I've been paying attention to this from the early meetings in the library a year and a half or more ago. It's a challenging site. There's no doubt about that. The parking situation, it's basically awful, and it's probably the best we can do, what they've proposed. As I think the preserving or enhancing the accessibility from the corners, the different parts of the lot, makes a big difference. It makes it much more reasonable as proposed. Short of clearing the site and lowering it 20 feet, I don't think we can do anything much better than what's here.
I think the
Well, I
roadway
guess-
can be fixed.
I think
I think again, right, there's two issues. There's the intersection issue and then there's the additional parking issue. I think that certainly we
Well-
have to go look at the intersection issue. I think it's the same professional that looks at that intersection issue that I think could probably offer up some other alternatives with regard to, looking at, it wouldn't, there is no solving the parking issue, it's not, but perhaps some, the 8 to 10 other spaces that aren't, don't create the big retaining wall, because I personally, I get that. But, there may be some other options, reverse angle, a couple more spaces here and there that just take a little bit of the bite out. Especially since I think what needs to be done is also look at that intersection and the entrance and egress by probably, I assume you'd have Howard Stein Hudson look at that a little bit more in depth, and they could look at the parking.
Right.
Options for parking as well.
So I guess
That's what I would recommend.
Okay, I
You
mean,
don't need to agree though.
right.
Well, here's where I think I am. If we are expected to do a decision, and so if we step back and we think, okay, if this was part of normal site plan review and we would be rendering a decision, as John said, we wouldn't close the meeting tonight. We would be looking for some more information, because I think there's been enough discussion here about some serious issues with respect to the parking and the circulation that definitely merit additional investigation and further study. And to simply say that those things can't be done
simply because of the 10-foot retaining wall, I think is premature at this point. I think it requires more investigation to that. So, you know, if we're thinking about this, then I think that the comments that the public has made, bear some more investigation and a little bit more work and thoughtfulness, and particularly what the town engineer said and what the chief of police has said.
Bob Lasher, County Road and Town Manager. When I first met with the trustees last summer, they were very receptive to coming here back in 1970. I just want to make sure that you understand that if the town is going to set the rules for others, I expect to follow them too. But I understand we're exempt, we can shade a little bit here and there. But I have no interest in you treating the library, and we had the same discussion with the superintendent of schools, for those of you who were at town meeting. We understand what the rules are. Doesn't matter that we're exempt. We want to follow the same process that you'd put anyone through, with the understanding that what you say isn't binding, and that's fine. I just want to make sure there's no perception out there that just because it's a library or just because it's a school project that we're treating ourselves much differently, because I don't like that.
Thank you. Thanks for providing that, because that hasn't necessarily, I don't want to put any.
Yeah.
In other towns, in other places,
Right.
and in other times, that's not always the perspective.
Right.
So thank you for providing that
Yeah,
perspective.
I mean, I mean, personally, that's no part of it. I mean, I'm by profession an engineer of different things, but basically an engineer. I'm very familiar with the library, regular user of it. I know Middlesex Ave. I had very good friends who lived on Deering Street, right across from the wall, for years. And absolutely, I think we want, you know, some striped parallel parking spots on Middlesex Ave, perhaps some on School Street. I think that's a simple part of the equation. But the remainder of it, the engineering, if you will, of the building and the expansion, I think has been very well done. I think it's something that we should be careful and to preserve.
I just want to make one last point about the impact of that glass wall on the residential neighborhood. And you can see it here in this image. And I understand there are blinds, but as somebody said, you know, in the winter at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, there's going to be all kinds of illumination behind that glass. And that's, in my opinion, that's going to be one of the biggest impacts to anybody who lives in that neighborhood. So I think to come to an understanding on how that's managed before it becomes a problem, and if there are blinds, some guidelines so that at a certain time those blinds are used to mitigate for the neighbors. And that's my only major point.
Well, just a couple of things about that is that since they are motorized, that there can be timers that are set, that are attached to those, so that that can be programmed and reprogrammed again if we should have to do that. I mean, that's part of the reason why they're motorized. So we'll take that into account when we do our final specifications for those two. I just want to say something about Mr. Adams. The retaining wall isn't something that we've just made up. That isn't something that hasn't been engineered or looked at by our civil engineer. Of course, we haven't done full engineering for it. I mean, these are the realities of that site. That site has only so much that it can sort of give to the town. For its parking, certainly on that side, and egress will come with a very high price tag, and two, a very significant engineering and a detriment to the neighborhood on that side of the property. So I'd almost like to just make sure that you understand and the committee understands that that wasn't something that Chris just says, and you should believe it. That comes with some evidence. On the parallel parking along Middlesex Avenue, we just have a very, and we'll talk to the traffic consultant, we'll try to understand that. But we too, our first and foremost responsibility is for the health and safety and welfare of the community, and I would have personally, as principal of the firm, a bit of a problem by doing parallel parking. Now, if the town would like to give us a limited liability for that, angle parking, angle parking, if they'd like to sign a limited liability and we want to go ahead and sort of essentially tell us to do that, then I think we'd be amenable to that, but I don't think that we can take the responsibility just on hearsay for 8 parking spaces to basically have that in perpetuity be a potential safety issue. So I make sure that, you know where we're coming from. We don't take these things lightly, we're very serious about them also. So I know it's a solution, anything's a solution, there are just some better solutions than others. And in our opinion, that's not the best solution for 8 parking spaces.
Okay, so where are we?
Back to the schedule. Yep.
Question is, thank you, appreciate you sharing that.
June 9th at 8:30?
Yes, the question is, what are we asking them to come back with?
The good news is the issues are fairly limited,
Yeah.
right? But, right, I think what we'd like is to see some more information, ideas and analysis on that intersection hearing in Middlesex. And if, great if you've already done the work on looking at different parking scenarios, if you could share that with us so that we could look at those and sort of maybe come to the same place where you are. But I don't think we're there yet. So.
Would you be able to do the same on the circulation issue, showing us how you've come to that same conclusion about how problematic it would be to have the circulation
We can mark something up for you, but yes, I mean, it essentially sound and look exactly what we said tonight, but that's within your purview.
But a lot of people have expressed that as an issue to be looked at.
Yes.
That they're concerned that that the circulation is not being continued, including the chief of police. So
Correct.
I think it's worth trying to show us that in a little bit more detail.
We'll draw a section through it so you can see what that would look like.
And then Gene has also, and Jesse, done some notes that they typically do for these, which I assume you have, and if you could, we'd ask people to address these comments formally as well. Anything else we want to be thinking about?
I think you want to look at taking that Deering Ave entrance and putting it in the middle of the Middlesex Ave. Pick up 3 or 4 spots on Deering, you lose 3 or 4 on Middlesex, but I think you can make it swing around. You might lose that tree, but this is supposed to be a 100-year project, I thought. Tree will grow back. Plant another tree.
Middle of the block.
Middle of the block,
Well-
or close to it.
Sufficiently
works.
far away from the existing intersection.
Lose accessibility
For which portion of it?
that way. The public way from the corner of Deering and Middlesex.
Well, we can come back up from here, but this is all accessible. I didn't know that the east pathway was 100% accessible, which
Only
is,
the expansion.
yeah, well, that's fine. We've got a lot of constraints. We've got a lot of pedestrian ways that are probably more easily accessible, not handicap accessible, but accessible than we do with vehicles. And the vehicles are probably more dangerous. So we might lose one, and I'm not sure when you mean accessible, if you mean handicap accessible pathway. We lose one accessible pathway, but we gain a better vehicular movement, then we've got better pedestrian pathways everywhere.
We will be required by the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board to provide every exit out of the building to have an accessible means of egress to a public.
I don't think this impacts any of the
I'm just making sure that
Yeah, no, I don't think it impacts egress because you can go east. You just need to get away from the building.
East is not accessible, west is.
Coming from either of the 2 fire stairs west of the corner of Deering and Middlesex is the
You told me the path on the east side of the building that goes down to Middlesex is accessible. We talked about bringing a stretcher up it.
That's the lower level. That's the lower level.
Well, it's,
The egress stair comes out at the lower level, doesn't it?
these are the concerns that we need to address. It's 12:30.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I'm just saying, they need to look at it, that's all.
All right,
I
so
think there's solutions
So
for
I think
it.
we've summarized the things that, you guys clear on what we're looking for June 9th? You guys are good?
Okay.
Okay. So we're gonna continue the public hearing to June 9th, and so we're looking for a motion on that.
Move to continue the public hearing for the Reading Public Library project at 64 Middlesex Avenue until June 9th at 8:30 p.m. There will be no additional notice.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you all for coming and staying as late as you did. Appreciate it.
So I'm saying is,
See,
these
has
exits here are at a different level than the exits over here. These are lower.
The MF Charles.
This is not the final sketch. What I'm suggesting is that
They still here?
you've got to come up at a slope here, so you're still hitting that point. And you've got more slope here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Is that one more agenda item?
I don't think they're here.
Excuse me, folks. If you guys don't mind, we actually have one more agenda
That
item.
grade doesn't change.
So if we could ask you guys
None of
to-
that changes. It's just,
If you want to continue
I
talking
don't
in
know
the
if
hallway,
I don't know if
it'd
they
be
can do
great.
that. I'm just thinking, if we can get away from this corner, we pick up this parking, we lose some parking here. I don't know if the angle parking, frankly, I don't think we need to worry about parking.
Yeah, we got
I really don't. I mean, let people walk and we're gonna have to eat some of it.
Yeah, my other question is, I'm not sure if
have gum. You want a piece of gum? Come in.
Yeah,
Want
because
gum?
this is going up, and so the further you
Really?
get up here,
3
the
pieces.
steeper this gets, right?
And I have mints.
It's really crazy now, though. It's really steep. It's actually slippery. So I think the further we go that way, the worse.
All right, next
this
on the
becomes.
agenda.
All right.
You get the award.
Wow, guys.
You are soldiers.
We were just gonna do it without them.
Sean, I warned you it was gonna be a late night.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it. All right, let's get this going. Thank you very much. Oh, it's a public. This is a public. This is not a public hearing.
No.
Thank goodness.
Thank God.
All right. So next on the agenda
Thank
is
The review request, mechanical
Mechanical
unit screening.
Unit per site plan review decision.
Right.
Gene, go.
So, this was one of the items that was in the site plan review decision
Right.
from way back. The issue has to do with the mechanical units that are on top of the main block.
Right.
They are recessed, but not recessed enough to be away from the view from the street. So there's a need to deal with them. We asked the applicant to go before the historical commission because of the historic nature of the building. The historical commission, the applicant suggested some sort of a pseudo wrought iron fence, like an aluminum fence, like what's down in the courtyard. We weren't sure about that, and asked them to go to historical. Historical said, you don't need the fence, just paint them black, a non-glossy black, and call it a day. And I couldn't agree with them more.
So, if you want to
Are
add
you
anything to that, just can. Just do it. 12 at your own.
Actually, Gene summed it up.
Excellent. All right.
So, are
comments?
you okay with painting them black? Can they be painted black, and are you okay with that?
The only debate we had, we're happy to paint them whatever color is deemed appropriate. The thinking at historical was either black or the dark green that seems to be the same dark green that's on the building now, the clear story color. So we're happy to go in either direction.
You think they would have been more of a lead-coated metallic, like a grayish black?
Wouldn't have been there.
Well, there would have been a penthouse, potentially, a head house of some
Well,
sort.
there's a clear story
Yeah.
window up there, and, set of windows. And they've already painted those, a deep moss green, and you can see them from lower, or from south Main Street.
Do you folks have the photo renderings that were?
So we have he's got a color one.
We had it somewhere. Where did you take that?
Yeah, like 3 hours ago.
So what color is the existing penthouse?
Oh, here.
It's a dark green.
Dark green, the whole thing is dark green?
I got it right here.
I guess I would just say to match it all the way across. Probably,
see this?
the units are
Dark.
probably green anyway,
Sweet.
right?
Moss green.
Green or gray.
Yeah.
I'll defer.
I mean, if historic's happy with that, I I defer to them.
That's what I thought.
The black, is that what you're saying?
Either we were,
Black or the green, is that
Well,
what you're saying?
this one's green.
already green.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Then it
Go with the
seems to
green.
make sense.
so it's
You want, would you prefer the green?
they already have the paint.
The green, I think that would be, it would be nice to match that, clear source.
I'm hearing green, I'm feeling green.
Green.
So I think generally, you know, when we, on something like this, we approach, you know, typically we'd ask you to do a fence. We wouldn't really be having a conversation. It's pretty much what we want to do. I think in this particular case, given the historic nature of the building, we're fine to go along with this and grant this accommodation, do it this way.
Paint it green, no fence.
You got
Right.
it.
And because the building is fantastic. Came up great.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
guys did
Yeah.
a great job with the building. Really impressed. Nice job. So, and some good, good stores on Main Street.
Hard to fill up.
Yeah.
excuse me, one quick point. There should be something in there that it'll be maintained and painted. So you, in the future, you're not seeing a little bit of the silver shining.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did not draft a formal decision, but we can.
we can put something together with that.
Follow it up.
Okay.
So unless you're good, we'll take a vote.
All right.
Sure. Do we need a vote?
You can make a vote, and it would be just in accordance with the commission's site plan decision.
Okay. The move that the CPDC determine that the proposed treatment for the rooftop mechanical is adequate to meet the requirements of the site plan.
Second.
All those in favor? All right.
All right.
Thank you guys
Thank you,
again.
guys. Sorry it was so late.
I know, all that wait for that.
I
That's
thought
the
for sure you
alternative,
guys
right?
would hit the road.
Good night.
Thanks.
Take care, folks. So we still, so you guys want to talk about the bicycle tag?
No.
And we'll finish the meeting minutes.
Does the bike path go by the library?
Motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second. All those in favor? All right.
All right, guys.